about showing up and being recorded on the internet, have no fear. Only the people who are unmuted will, and appearing in this little nice yellow box, will be recorded in the YouTube video. And then one other thing we'd like to say, I know we appreciate everyone's support so much, but all of your favorite local bookstores and independent stores of all manner are encouraging you to shop early this year. There are pipeline difficulties with printing difficulties and all kinds of things concerning us about books. So if you've got books that you want, we encourage you to order them now rather than waiting this year.
Yes, we're already hearing of some books where their publishers are running out of them and they're not going to be able to reprint them. So if there's specific things you want, definitely get those orders in as early as you can. That really helps us out tremendously. Because we are asking you all to stay muted, please do use the chat box to ask questions. We will have time for audience questions at the end of the event, and you can pose questions at any time throughout the event in the chat box. Davith and I will store them up, and we will pose those for you at the end. Those are all of the boring announcements. Tonight, I'm so incredibly happy to welcome Jane Smiley to Northshire Live to talk about her brand new novel, Perestroika in Paris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. She was last in Saratoga way back in 2015 to celebrate the publication of the second book in her truly remarkable Last 100 Years trilogy, which is a night that I remember incredibly fondly. I personally have been a huge fan of her work since my early 20s, so she's really carried me through my whole adulthood thus far.
Wow.
And she's a writer of really astonishing breadth, one who never stops testing her own boundaries, from the delicious satire Moo to the complex psychological narrative of her Pulitzer Prize winner, 1,000 Acres, to her thoughtful nonfiction. Smiley always gives her readers with deep insight into human nature and a real understanding of moral complexity. She's going to be interviewed tonight by Teresa Genaro, a journalist and a great friend to the Northshire bookstore. Teresa is an English teacher who also writes about horse racing for publications including Blood Horse, Forbes, Saratogian, Daily Racing Form, USA Today, The Guardian, and the New York Times. Please join me in welcoming them both to Northshire.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'd love to be there in person.
We wish you could be here in person too. It would be lovely to have you back here. Thank you so much for doing this with us tonight. As we talked a little bit about beforehand, the town of Saratoga is particularly fond of people who write about horses or who have anything to do with horses. And you have had so many experiences with horses in so many different ways. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you about that. But I wonder if you could just first talk to us a little bit about how the idea for the book came about and maybe read a selection for us, please.
Well, I was in Paris and I happened to visit a really interesting woman named Gina Rarick, who was an American woman from Wisconsin, who was pretty much starting out as a horse racing trainer outside of Paris. And I had met her through the rail column in the New York Times, which is a blog. And so I visited her horse racing place. And then I came back to the Place de Trocadero, which is on the west side of the Seine and above on a hill up on the west side of the Seine. And I was looking around. It's a beautiful spot. It's in a beautiful area and it's not far from Auteuil and the Bois de Boulogne. And I thought, oh, wouldn't that be fun if a horse escaped from the race course to here? And then I thought, boy, you're crazy. And then I just couldn't resist. And so I got on it and I went back to Paris many times and I did the best I could. And here we go. We got it. It was fun. Really fun, I should say.
I'm eager to hear about your process of research. I had imagined what it might be like. But before we get there,
I have to say it involved a lot of pastries and a lot of French onion soup and, the occasional filet. And so, yes.
And lots of beets and carrots and apples.
Gosh, it was it was such a tribulation, I have to say.
Would you mind reading us a selection from it, please?
Well, I'll read the part that you suggested, which takes place actually toward the end, but it is not a, what am I saying? I don't think it gives anything away. No, I'm trying not to give anything away. Sorry, it's taking. It was spring. He wasn't making much progress on his new nest. This is the raven in the nearby plane tree. He was off doing ravenish things, whatever they were. Paris was happy, but her happiness felt like a scarf of morning mist floating above her, ready to blow away any minute. Raoul, that's the raven, had been seized by a desire for one last circuit. He had enjoyed visiting with his cousin, Liam Corax Corvus, who lived in the Jardin des Plantes. So he flew there again. But though Liam was welcoming, the garden was as tame as could be. He longed for something more, one last adventure. So we'll see where he goes.
What we didn't get from that section is the fact that the story is told from the point of view of the animals. And
Yes.
Knowing your affinity for horses, I can't help but wonder if Black Beauty was a little bit of an influence there, because I suspect that you read it.
Oh yeah, it's very possible. I mean, I read all kinds of horse books when I was a kid, and Black Beauty was definitely one of them. I also did, I think it was for The Guardian, I did a reread on Black Beauty, might have been for The Guardian. And I cried in all the same places this time that I did the first time around. And it really struck me. I hadn't realized the first time around that it had any political intentions, but it did. And it was still very sad, but I love Black Beauty. I liked all kinds of horse books. It never occurred to me that horses or dogs or cats didn't have minds of their own and didn't have opinions and didn't have feelings. And so it was just one step sort of toward giving them a way of talking about their feelings and their opinions.
And the other books that you have written about horses are kind of unsparing in the detail of what it's like to be a horse or to own a horse. And you write about them both emotionally and, very, not scientifically, but frankly. And here you took the human voice out of it and gave most of the voices to the animals in a way that is whimsical in the best possible way. Was that a deliberate departure? Were you looking for something different in style and tone, or did it just come about?
I think it just came about. I mean, I knew that I wanted to write this weird story about a horse who escapes. And the very first paragraph is about how she escapes. And I tell it from her point of view. And so it just went on from there. In Horse Heaven, there were 6 horses who were specifically talked about. And I tried to talk about things somewhat from their point of view, but they don't actually speak. They just exist in a kind of idiosyncratic way. They appear to have opinions, but they don't speak. So this was the next step.
Through the course of the novel, we get to learn not only Paris, and I hope you will tell us about the real life Paris as well, but we spend time with a raven and some ducks and a rat and a dog, and there may be someone else I'm forgetting. Tell us a little bit about the
The
research that you
mallard.
did.
Gosh, don't
The
forget
mallard.
the mallard.
Sorry, the mallard. About the research that you did to learn their habits. And obviously it's not a wholly realistic depiction of these animals, but you had to know a lot about them to be able to write those characters that way.
Well, there's plenty of stuff that we know about animals and how their minds work, or apparently how their minds work. There are many people who've been totally curious about animals, and so they've written a lot of stuff, and I looked all that up. The dog Frida is based on our dog Frida. And she was a really interesting dog. She was a rescue, incredibly beautiful dog. And there was a kind of, I don't know, there was a kind of glumness about her, even though she was active and she seemed happy when she was moving around. When she was lying in her chair, she would look like she was having existential despair. So I attributed that to her Germanness. The other animals, I just did the best I could. I knew that Paris had to have some companions. I knew that a dog wasn't enough. And I figured the most likely companions would be some kind of a bird, and then there probably would be rodents. I didn't know exactly who I was going to choose, but I let the story kind of lead me to the various animals and the various people. People had to show up too, because there are people in Paris. It's hard to believe, but yeah.
Well, that was the next question I was going to ask you, that just when the animal community is so well established and seems to be so self-sufficient, all of a sudden there are some humans who become an integral part of the story.
Well, I figured, okay, she's a horse. She has to drop her manure. So someone's going to notice it, and likely it's going to be one of the groundskeepers. And so that's how I came up with Pierre, the head of the groundskeepers group. And there are going to be gendarmes walking around. Some of them might notice her. But I had to come up with a way for them not to do anything to her. So I made the local gendarme a person who's trying to get over his alcohol addiction, so that he thinks it's an illusion and he doesn't know what's going on. And so all of that was quite fun. My local grocery store is run by a Frenchman from Normandy, whose name is Jerome. So I handed him the vegetable stand. And so, yeah, all of it was fun. I love doing that. And that's the way it's been with other books too. I like making up characters. I like having characters come in and sort of surprise me. One of the books I wrote, Private Life, I thought I knew who the characters were, and then someone sold the chance to be a character in one of my novels at an auction. And he turned out to be the guy who was the character that won the prize. He turned out to be a really interesting character. So I like that. I like innovation. I like being, surprised and then figuring out how to fit it in. And that's one of the things that makes it all fun.
I found the novel very soothing as I was reading it, which is not to say it's without its moments of conflict. Probably a lot of us are doing quite a bit of reading, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I am very much trying to avoid any sort of books that I know are going to agitate me. And this had the exact opposite effect in it. It was so soothing and comforting to read, and surely, obviously, it was conceived long before the year that it has become 2020. But the timing of it seems to be really quite good in terms of how this book might hit with your audience.
Well, I asked the publisher about a year and a half ago if they would consider publishing it at right about this time. We had no idea, of course, that the COVID was going to hit us, but I thought it might be a nice distraction from the election. And I was tired of reading about all that stuff too. So yeah, that was part of the point of publication. I think when I was over the years after I conceived of it, I thought, okay, maybe this will be my sort of amuse-bouche, you know, the last bit of my dinner that I hand out to the audience. And they'll say, where did this come from? But I always liked it, and I always wanted it to be published. And I've written a lot of stuff about issues, historical issues, current issues, all kinds of issues like that, political issues. I just was tired of doing that, and this was a good break for me, so it became a good break for other people too.
And I had read nothing about the book before I just opened it and started to read. And I have to say, after maybe the first 10 pages, one of my thoughts was, where did this come from? It was such a departure from your other work, which I think also, you know, is part of its charm and its gift. Can you just tell folks who may not be aware of your life outside of books with horses and how they've come to play such a prominent role in your professional life as well?
Well, horses are fascinating. If you ride horses and if you make the terrible mistake of breeding horses until you're just going, oh, shit, what am I going to do with all these horses? One of the things you notice about them is the same thing that you notice about your children when they're babies. They're different from one another. They have similarities and they also have differences. And that always fascinated me about the kids, and it fascinated me about the horses. If you ride like I do, and you're kind of a nervous and not very talented rider, then you can't count on knowing what you're doing. You have to pay attention to the idiosyncrasies of the horse in order to sense what they might be seeing. I had one horse who was constantly, from the day he was born, staring off into the distance. And then a few years ago, I read an article that said that in horse herds, there are certain members of the horse herd who are basically the sentinel horses. And their job is to keep an eye out, not to dominate the herd, but to make sure that they see things in a distance that might be dangerous. And I realized that maybe that was the inheritance of some of my horses, because they're very observant. And so that made me think about other things, horses that enjoy getting out and doing stuff more than they enjoy eating, and horses that will do anything just to eat as much as possible and don't really want to do anything. So that fascinated me. I was a big fan of different lines of race horses and how they seem to be different on the track, and how some like to go slow and then go for it at the end, and some like to be steady, and it just fascinated me. So I've thought about that in terms of people, and also I've thought about that in terms of horses. Horse breeds aren't as distinct from one another as dog breeds are. And so in some sense, there's more to explore there than there is with dog breeds.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the racehorses you've owned, including Paris?
Well, none of them were any good. None of them made it on the track. A few of them had a few wins. So it didn't turn out to be a big money maker, but it did turn out to be totally interesting. And they're all related to one another. One of them that I was very fond of was quite alert and a little scary when you were on him as a young horse. But then I sold him to, he got to be a good horse to ride, and I sold him to a girl who rode him very well. And then I got, about a year after I sold him, I got a note from her mom, I think, who said that the girl had been on him. I think the girl was about 10. The girl had been on him and had slipped to the side, and she saw, the mom saw the horse move over to get underneath her to prevent her from falling. And then that horse's half sister was similar about taking care of children. She didn't like to be ridden by adults, but it was like she took care of the children. And I thought, that's really interesting about horses. So I noticed in the horses that I bred that they had similarities and differences. And they were all the ones that I bred that I kept, they were very kind, and they didn't want to hurt you, or they didn't want you to be hurt. One of them, who was my first one I bred, I did fall off him once, and I stood up and I put my hand to my back, my lower back, because I had that's where I landed. And he came trotting over and he started sniffing my lower back as if to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Yes, I'm attributing feelings to him, but he seemed to be concerned that something was actually hurting me. Whereas I had another horse I was riding that I hadn't bred, and I fell off of him and he just ran for it. And I got rid of him right away because he didn't care. And the ones that I bred and knew from foalhood, they seemed to actually have a connection to me. And that was what I wanted when I was a kid. That was all I wanted when I was a kid, was to have a horse friend. And maybe that's how Etienne is. Maybe Etienne is a kind of version of me.
Well, I definitely would like to hear you talk about Etienne, but you just expressed something that you say quite explicitly in the novel at one point, that the animals have to take care of a person who has experienced a significant life event. And it's stated emphatically and in fact, and all of the animals understand it, and all of us as readers understand it. And you just make that perfectly plain, that it is the animals who have to take care of the humans as opposed to vice versa, or perhaps in conjunction with.
I would say in conjunction with, it passes back and forth. We feed them, but I don't think dogs and horses, which are the primary animals I know, I don't think they do things only for treats. I think they do things because they come to sense their connection with us and their responsibilities. One time I was, now Paris was another one of those sentinel horses, and she tends to be kind of spooky. But one time I was walking her in one of the arenas at the barn where I used to keep her, and something spooked her. She was right behind me. I had her on the lead rope. Something spooked her, and she jumped forward, but she didn't touch me. She could have if she had, and I've had horses that weren't paying any attention and bumped into me. But she knew where my space was, and she knew where her space was. And she voluntarily did not want to enter my space. And so I've just noticed that about some horses. Other horses, they don't care. They bump into you, or. But
There's another wonderful line in the book, because Paris identifies herself often as a mare. Like, she takes great pride, she's 4
Yeah.
years old, she's a mare, and you say this great thing in the middle, and I figured this had to have come from your own observations, that mares take responsibility for everything a group of horses might do.
Well, that was part of when I was reading about the sentinel horses. That was part of that same article or whatever, or the book or whatever it was that I was reading, about how the mares run the herd, and they're in charge of the foals, but they're also in charge of where are we moving to eat right now, and what else might we do? And so the mares seem to be the bosses in the herds. That doesn't surprise me. All the mares I've had have been responsible,
I was really struck, sort of switching from content to style, when I hit a chapter that was all of a sudden in the present tense. And it was so
but don't
striking.
talk about it. We don't want to do any giveaways.
Oh, no, not at all. No, we won't talk about what the chapter was about or where it comes in the book or anything like that. But it was obviously a very deliberate stylistic choice. And it was funny, I noticed immediately that you were writing in present tense, and then I didn't notice when you went back to past tense.
Well, past tense is so normal. It's present tense. To read something in present tense is unusual, and you have to do it for a reason. And then past tense returns as a kind of normality. I love the way different types of organization in books work, books written in the second person or books written in the first person, and how different they are from books written in the third person or books written in the present tense versus the past tense. So I like trying out all kinds of things.
Did you just sort of organically divide the book into chapters? Did you plot it out ahead of time, knowing what each chapter was going to be about and where the focus might change? Or did you just sort of let it unroll as you wrote?
I just let it unroll as I wrote it. I try always to make the chapters not terribly long, because I want the reader to be able to take a break, because I like to take a break. So I like there to be chapters. I'm not going to ever write Ulysses, I'm not just going to try that, because it's too hard to maintain your concentration if there aren't breaks.
Mm-hmm. As an English teacher, I'm constantly accused by my students of overanalyzing books and looking for things that, do you really think the author tried to do that? And I can hear their voice in my head as I get this next question to you, but there are so many elements of ideas about home in the novel. And that is another thing that strikes me as sort of particularly poignant to be reading at this time, where home has so many both positive and negative associations with us at this point. But that idea really runs through pretty much every character. Was that something that was deliberate?
Well, I think partly it grows out of the fact that the great grandmother, Madame de Mornay, and Etienne, they're basically sequestered, given their circumstances, and so they're very aware of inside versus outside. Especially Etienne. He's ambivalent about whether he wants to go outside, whether he wants to be part of the larger world. I see him as a kind of natural introvert whose grandmother has raised him on introvert sort of principles for her own reasons. I'm not going to say what they are. As far as the birds go, you know, the raven and the mallards, for birds, where your nest is a very important thing, because you have to protect the eggs, and it's territorial too. So that was part of that. As far as the dog is concerned, she has never had a home, at least as long as she's been away from her original birth group. And maybe that has led to her feeling, I don't know, the British publisher is naming the book Strays in Paris, The Strays in Paris. And I think that comes from Frida. Frida's a stray. She doesn't want to look like a stray. She's too beautiful to be a stray. She's not naturally a wild dog. So she would like, I think, to have something like a home, but she doesn't know what a home is. And she's a little afraid of it. So yeah, that's something that came up. But maybe if I'd chosen different breeds of animals, you know, maybe if I'd chosen a giraffe, it wouldn't have come up. The giraffe escapes into Paris. Oh my God.
The sequel. I am a very inexperienced and not very good rider, and it's been many, many years since I have ridden. But as I was reading the parts of this where someone is on horseback, the way you described that experience, both going slow and going fast, I found myself almost moving in the rhythm that you were describing of the way the horse was walking. And I would find myself distracted because I would go off into thinking what it was like to be on a horse. And I sat here this afternoon thinking about the book and thinking, I think I need to go take some lessons again. It's been a long time since I've been on a horse. And you make it sound so fantastic. And how did you capture that?
Pleasures. It is a great pleasure for me. And there's the pleasure of the connection with the horse, and there's the pleasure of the sight of the horse's ears and his neck or her neck in front of you. And there's the pleasure of the different gaits. And there's the pleasure. I also love going for walks. That's one of my greatest pleasures too. But there's the pleasure of going in a little different way on a walk on top of a horse. You're up higher, and you're going a little faster. And there's just something, and you feel that companionship that you have with the horse, and you're also paying attention to what the horse is looking at. One time I was, this wasn't on a trail, but I was in an arena and on Paris actually. And I noticed her turn her head. And so I turned my head to see what she was looking at. And there was a lynx standing outside the arena looking at us. And Paris didn't act frightened or anything. And I might have been frightened, but Paris wasn't, so I wasn't. And then the lynx just looked at us for a while and then kept on walking up the hill. And so, I don't know, there's something special about that day when we saw the lynx, and it was young and it was quite beautiful and graceful.
Are you working on anything at the moment?
Always. But
Will you tell us about it?
No.
No.
I'm always working on several things, so I never know which one is going to pop out first.
I saw someone had written something in the chat earlier, and someone had asked me outside of this forum whether I thought that this book would be suitable for younger people, younger readers, tweens, YA, that sort of thing. And I felt like it very much would be, while at the same time, it was very enriching for adults. Did you have a particular audience in mind for this?
No. I was asked if they wanted it to be a young adult novel, and no. Yeah, for the books I've written about for young adults about horses, they've been more instructive. This isn't instructive, it's more explorative.
Mm-hmm.
So the characters of the young adult books, Abby is the first series, and then Ellen is the second series. And that's about learning. Abby's is about learning how to train horses in a humane way. And Ellen's is about learning how to ride and how to connect and why she would want to do it. But this book isn't about that. This isn't a instructive book. This is just a exploratory book, I guess I would say. So if a kid likes it, there's nothing for the parent to be worried about.
No, and I do think, again, well, it's not an easy read, but it's not hard either. I would imagine that middle school kids could get through this pretty easily. Yeah, as someone who spends a lot of time.
I got through Oliver Twist when I was in 7th grade. I don't think it's anywhere near as difficult as Oliver Twist.
And presumably you weren't paid by the word either, which would make it a little shorter to get through.
Oh gosh. I didn't understand a word of it, I have to say, but it led me to Dickens, and I thank it for that.
Tell us about that. Tell us about your affinity for Dickens.
Well, the story is we were assigned Oliver Twist in 7th grade, Great Expectations in 8th grade, and David Copperfield in 9th grade. And in 7th, even though I was an avid reader as a child, I think I had heard of A Christmas Carol, but I hadn't read any Dickens books. So I was the idiot in the back of the room in the class discussion of Oliver Twist, who raised her hand and asked why he couldn't have a second bowl of porridge. My teacher just shook her head, Great Expectations, I don't remember understanding anything, but I kept my mouth shut that time. So when it came, we had 2 weeks to read the books. And when it came to David Copperfield in 9th grade, I put it off and put it off and put it off. And finally, because I was a good student, I sat down on Saturday morning. It was due on Monday. I sat down on Saturday morning and started. And I read it in 2 days. I adored it. I understood it. I thought it was a wonderful book, and it really gave me a taste for Dickens. I didn't study English literature. I studied Old English literature and medieval literature in college. And then my senior year in college, around Christmas time, I picked up Our Mutual Friend, and I adored that too. So that gave me even more of a taste for Dickens. And that stayed with me, I will say. Though I have to say that as an adult, I finally discovered Anthony Trollope, who was an avid horse person. And I discovered the books he wrote about racing, and also the other books he wrote. So I think Dickens and Trollope are an interesting contrast for sure. And I think that Trollope writes about the various shades of sanity and ambivalence. And I think Dickens writes about this little circle of not quite insanity, but not quite sanity that runs around the Trollope. And the funny thing is that when they were alive, Dickens was the one that struck everybody as the proper person, and Trollope was the one who, somebody said, I think it was one of Virginia Woolf's relatives, said that when he started laughing, you thought the roof of the building was going to fly off. So they're interesting they're interesting pairing as writers.
I over a number of years ago committed to reading the Palliser series and the Barchester Chronicles, just because I felt like in the winter I liked big books that I could just immerse myself in for months and months at a time. And Trollope was so good for that. Well, also, I think, I agree with what you said about the world of Trollope in some ways being more constrained and people much more on the edge about going outside the boundary than in the Dickens novels.
But did you ever read the Kellys and the O'Kellys?
No.
Oh, you have to read that. That's a horse racing book.
Okay. All right, that's next on the list. I have two more questions that I want to ask you before we turn this over to the folks who have been listening. Who else or what else are you reading for comfort these days?
Well, I'm not sure I'm reading them for comfort, but I read an interesting book called The Knockout Queen. I did a talk with what's her name, Rufi Thorpe. So I read one of her latest book, The Knockout Queen. I thought that was really good. I have been reading, oh, why can't I think of what it is? That's so weird. I just read part of it today. The titles kind of escape me, and then I open my book and I go back to it. I'm sorry, it'll come back to me, but I can't remember what it is. And because I have to teach college, and I have undergraduate classes, so I'm beginning to read the books I'll be teaching in the winter term. So I'm reading some of those. Why can't I reread Animal Farm. That was totally fascinating.
I bet.
And so anyway, just a lot of different things.
We talked a lot about horses and horse racing in this, and I know that.
I know what it was. I've been reading Hamnet. You know that one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's totally interesting. And since I really feel a kind of connection to Shakespeare through 1,000 Acres, I think it's fascinating that this author decided to talk about his private life. She never even names him. He's there, but she doesn't name him as Shakespeare because he's not Shakespeare yet.
Yeah. Did you see today that one of the first people to get the COVID vaccine in England is named William Shakespeare today?
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Yes, I think he's 91 years old, and perhaps has a good PR agency to get him to get him linked up there and make world news today. A year or so ago, you wrote an op-ed for the LA Times in which you expressed some despair about the state of horse racing, in which you spent a lot of time in that sport and you loved it, and it was clear in some of the books that you read. So after reading that, and obviously you're not alone in those concerns, I was a little surprised when I picked this up today to read that it was about a racehorse.
Well, she did have some time on the racetrack, but that was around the time, that was before I started writing the book.
Okay.
And she stayed sound. She didn't have any issues. But I think when I first started out in horse racing, first of all, I chose as my foundational sire a horse that ran 32 times and was sound from beginning to end, because that's what and my horse, the one I bought and had at the time, Mr. T, he ran, I think he ran in 20. He ran in a lot of races too. I think he had 25 starts or something like that. And he was sound. When I bought him, there was nothing wrong with him from top to bottom. And after all those races. And I was terribly naive. I thought that was what horse racing was heading toward. And it became evident over the years that no, that was not what horse racing was heading toward. Horse racing was heading toward going faster and having as many horses in the barn as you possibly could, and then, tossing them when they were done. And when I first started in horse racing, it looked like people understood this. This was what we talked about on that blog, The Rail, for the New York Times. I thought it was heading in the right direction. And one of my good friends was a racehorse vet and then became a vet at UC Davis. And he was working hard to send it in the right direction, but it didn't happen. It got worse. And it's because the fan base has narrowed, and so there's less money, and it has to turn into more of a spectacle than it had to be when there was a big fan base. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what's going to happen with horse racing. According to Gina, what I read on Gina's Facebook page, that's happening in France. I never thought it would happen in France.
Well, those of us up here in Saratoga hope that horse racing has a long and healthy future, and that there will actually be people at the race course here again next year, unlike there were this summer. Rachel and David, I think you have a whole slew of questions there in the chat. We do,
and as a matter of fact, as we were getting these in, I remember that Miss Smiley has an appointment at 7, so we're going to have to cut it off a little early. But I think we've actually addressed a few of the questions that came up already in the chat, and so I'm going to skip to Christine's, who says, Miss Smiley, do you keep your racehorses after their time on the track is over? My daughter owns an off-the-track thoroughbred, and I often wonder how he perceives his world now versus his life at the track. Have you any observations regarding that with your own horses?
Well, none of my horses stayed at the track for very long, so their lives after are pretty continuous with their lives before. Some of them have come off. A couple of them were claimed, so I didn't keep them. Others have come off, or almost all the others have come off and become riding horses. But I think they're adaptable. You never know whether some horses love racing, and that's one of the things I try to get into in Paris. Some horses like racing. Other horses don't seem to, but they take to some other occupation, even if it's just trail riding. So it's varied very much with my horses. But only Mr. T stayed at the track until he was 9 years old. But he became a wonderful riding horse, wonderful trail horse. He was great. So I think he just liked it. Whatever it was, I think he liked to go out and about.
So I received a wonderful question in a direct message, which was, over the scope of your career, you've covered a lot of different genres. You've done, looking at it here, satire and epics and historical fiction and children's books. Is it hard to change gears from one to the next?
It's easy. It's what I like. It's what I'm used to. A good friend of mine who used to be an editor and a publisher said it's much harder for the publishing house than it is for me. And maybe she's right. But they've been very accommodating and sweet to me. And and it's not, as far as I can see, they don't roll their eyes when they get the new book. So they've been quite good about it. And that's what I've liked about it.
So I think we have time for one last question before we let you run off to your next appointment. And there was one very early on in the chat. I don't remember who asked. They asked if the pandemic has affected your writing life at all.
I don't know, because, I live in the countryside. I can still go to the horses. I can still go to the grocery store. And that's all I ever went to anyway. And so for me, it's been quite similar to, I guess the only thing I miss is having dinners with various local friends. And we don't do that, but we do it on Zoom. And our local grocery store is very careful about masks and, hand cleanser and all of that. And at the barn, we're always outside and we have to go there anyway to take care of the horses. So it's all basically has been sort of the same. And I just keep on with the books that I'm working on. So I'm lucky again.
Well, we should let you go. You have another Zoom here in like 8 minutes or something.
8 minutes.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And Teresa, thank you as well.
Thank you. It was a great interview. Thank you, Teresa.
Yes, thank you so much, Jane and Teresa. Thank you, audience. This has been fantastic. A wonderful evening. And hopefully we will see you all again soon. And Jane, I hope we can welcome you back to Saratoga for the next book post-pandemic. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Jane, can you wait 1 second?
Sure.
I just wanted to tell you that I wrote for the Rail also, and I remember the stuff that you wrote for them. Yes.
I thought
yes.
I recognized your name. So yes, this must be from where?
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Take care, y'all.